Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another fresh episode of Ramadan TV. Today, we are visiting our brother Bilal from Tyndall Gask Bentley Lawyers. We're visiting him to find out really some of the services about that they offer to the general public. At the same time, really to get a bit of an understanding of what, as a Muslim, you can and you can't do in some areas. So to give us a bit of an understanding of how we can run our daily life, and if you do face some issues that we may all come across, how we can act living in Australia in terms of facing the law, and how we can actually go about speaking to a lawyer to help us solve the problem that we may face. So without further delay, I would like to welcome Brother Bilal. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Bilal.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair for taking the invitation and inviting us to spend some time with you. Brother Bilal, first, I think a lot of people in their mind, they want to know about, how they can interact with lawyers being a Muslim in Australia. So probably it would be a good idea to even just to tell us a little bit about what kind of services you do provide here, and then maybe later on we can go into some of the services that they can access it as well outside the law firm.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Firstly, thank you for having me on your show. I just want to qualify what I'm about to say in saying that I am a qualified lawyer, but any references that I make in regard to Islamic rules or principles are my own views, and I would highly recommend that anyone listening check anything I say with religious scholars or sheikhs or imams. Now, to answer your question, essentially, our firm is a general practice firm, so we deal with a wide array of areas, including civil litigation, which is quite broad itself, can include recovery of debt, personal injury law, wills and estates, and other areas. Then there's criminal law, there's family law, and commercial and other areas. So we really are a general practice firm. I myself specialise in wills and estates, and I do wills for Muslims. And I also work in the civil litigation area, which includes employment law, workplace issues, injuries, and a few other smaller areas.
Excellent. So you've mentioned one of your specialties being will, and you do Islamic will, which we know of, which is a great news for a lot of the Muslims, because now we can have access to a will that's not just Islamic, but it's also abide by the Islamic law as well. So it's something that we can feel comfortable that after writing such a will, that it is going to have values after someone deceased, someone is passed away. So tell us a little bit about how this the Islamic will system work in here, and how do an individual go in terms of if they wanted to take this step, what would the steps they would need to take to get this started?
Okay, put simply, for the purpose of your viewers, a will is a document which essentially allows someone to note down what their intentions or their wishes are as to how to distribute their estate being property, cars, money. Now, if you don't have a will in Australia, you will die intestate, intestate being the word used for someone who passes away without a will. If you die intestate, essentially the government decides what will happen to your estate, which can have fairly significant consequences, particularly to Muslims. Muslims, as you would know, are required to write wills, which is interesting because in Australia there is no real requirement forcing people to draft wills. Many do, some don't, but there's no requirement. Whereas in Islam, there is a requirement. This comes from chapter 4, Surah An-Nisa in the Quran, which has numerous rules concerning Islamic inheritance. And in addition, we have the hadith of the Rasul salatu wasalam. You can look at book 51 of Bukhari, which is wasiya, which is wills. There's a hadith on the authority of Abdullah bin Umar, where the Prophet said that you must not let 2 nights pass. If you own something, you must not let 2 nights pass without writing a will. So it's very important from an Islamic point of view to write wills. So that brings us to, can we write wills in accordance with our laws here in Australia? The convenient thing about living here in this country is we're a relatively secular society. In politics and in some aspects there are Christian values, so-called Christian values, but generally speaking the laws are quite secular. So the laws concerning inheritance are quite flexible, and the courts recognise one's right to give or to bequeath or to give their estate to whomever they wish. So very, very flexible. That's the starting point. There are exceptions to the rules. So, for example, if a court becomes aware that a family member is receiving inadequate provision, they're dependent and they're not getting anything out of the estate, then a court might step in and override that general rule. But generally speaking, you can give to whomever you wish. Now, fortunately in Islam, we're very lucky because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides that all our immediate family members are catered for. We cannot exclude a son or a daughter or a father, alhamdulillah. So we have to provide for everyone. Now the rules are contained in Surah An-Nisa, and perhaps I won't go through them all because there's a lot, but essentially there are specific provisions, specific distributions to certain members of your family. Now, so long as we don't exclude people, and so long as members of the family are receiving adequate share, the courts generally will not interfere. So although the laws are not Islamic and they're secular, our rules, our principles fit in within the law because it's flexible.
And subhanAllah, just like what you mentioned as well, you said if it's been divided unfairly, or in some cases where you find the court stepping in, and we've mentioned as well, subhanAllah, in our will, Islamic will, you find that everybody's getting, alhamdulillah, accurately, it's to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed, which is good. So it's, giving everybody their haqq, their rights. So this is good that we can actually use our will. Now the question here is, can anybody write a will at home and be accepted by the court or by the Australian law when somebody passes away? Or there is actually a procedure that someone needs to take in terms of before, for example, myself, if I wanted to write my own will, do I just get a pen and paper and start writing my own will? Or do I consolidate someone like yourself so there is a valid documentation where it's actually that I can maybe later on that I can be safe to say that this is going to be a valid document in Australian law and in the court if it did end up going there?
Yeah, Ali, that's a very good question. And I guess in simple terms, anyone can write a will. The problem is if you write a will and you are unfamiliar with the rules concerning inheritance and the language you use in the will is unclear, then you will most probably, or your executor, who is a person who will administer your estate on your behalf, will have problems. You need to understand that when you write a will, ultimately after your death, the will be considered, depending on the circumstances, it can be considered by a court. Now, if the court don't understand what's in that document, or if they have problems following the format of the document or what's contained in the document, then the will may not be considered a valid will. That's the first issue. The second issue, a will must be adequately witnessed. So you need 2 independent witnesses who witnessed the testator being the person who writes the will. So two independent witnesses who witness the testator signing the will in both of the witnesses' presence at the same time with the same pen. So if those requirements are not followed, the will could fail, and this is the danger. So with wills, we're not talking big money. They're not, in order to get a lawyer to draft a will for you, they're not incredibly expensive. They're actually quite inexpensive when compared to seeing a lawyer about other issues. So although I certainly don't want to plug my services or the services of lawyers in general, I think it's a good idea for Muslims to approach a lawyer to draft a will, just to minimise the potential pitfalls that could be in place. It's a small amount of money to pay to avoid your family having not only emotional difficulties dealing with your death, but also having to deal with the rigmarole of getting that will accepted and administering the will. To get a lawyer to sort things out after your death can be very, very costly, as well as very tiring and difficult for family members to go through. So yes, you can do a will yourself. There are will kits which you can buy for, I think, $30 from the post office. But personally, as a lawyer, I don't think they're a good idea. I think I would encourage Muslims to get a lawyer, any lawyer. You don't even need a Muslim lawyer, to be honest. If you explain to a non-Muslim lawyer what you want, they should be able to do that for you. But I'm obviously happy to help. That's why I provide my service. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. Brother Bilal, you made very, very good points here, but I think even though, may Allah reward you, I can feel that you don't want to promote your service here, but I would strongly, from what I've heard from you and from what we've seen, I would probably strongly recommend seeing a Muslim lawyer, because obviously you've mentioned a valuable point early on, saying that you need to know the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has applied for this particular matter, which is the Islamic law. Islamic will, to write the Islamic will and how it actually gets divided, etc. So going to a non-Muslim, and probably we're not saying don't go to a non-Muslim, but I think for this particular case, I would probably strongly recommend